Hello everyone and welcome back to another Babbling Irons video, and today I'm delighted to be saying we are joined by the one, the only EuroExpert. How's it going, mate?
Oh, it's going very good. Thanks for having me on.
No worries at all. And yeah, today's going to be an interesting video. We're going to talk tactics about West Ham, how we could get the best out of maybe our current setup, and what EuroExpert thinks is our best West Ham setup. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So you're an expert. Yeah, it's great to have you on the channel. Do you want to just give a background into what you kind of do on a day-to-day basis when it comes to analysis? Because from what I've seen of your content, it's less about the obvious stuff and more about the more acute stuff when it comes to European football. So yeah, just tell the people about you and what you do.
Yeah, my whole thing is trying to inform English audiences like myself about European football and when it's relevant to them. So you would have seen me popping off in the summer about Lucas Paqueta, Gianluca Scamacca, all joining West Ham United. And the idea is to give a proper breakdown to the players coming in. So, the fans of West Ham and other clubs can enjoy and expect some good stuff, and rather having to lean on mainstream analysis, which often doesn't go up to the mark. And one thing I will say as well, Frankie, you can call me Alex for the rest of the video. A lot of people get trapped into thinking, I don't know his name, we'll call him Euro Expert. And then I sit here like I feel like some sort of egotistical god who everyone calls me like the expert. Anyone, that's the one thing as well. Anyone who wants to talk to me more after this video can always DM me, and I always try and respond in a decent, timely manner. And you can always call me Alex. You don't have to address me as the expert.
Maybe I'll just combine the two and call you Alex Expert, just so your ego is a bit higher. But yeah, no, that's interesting what you said, actually. I remember those videos in the summer when Paqueta and Scamacca joined, and you were quite fond of both of those signings. And how have you made of them so far? I know they've had injury issues and they've been in and out of the team, and we've been mixing around with formations, but did you expect it to be kind of a gradual integration, and this was always going to be a difficult season for both of them to come to the Premier League, but there is potential for both of those to become really good signings?
I did expect it to be gradual, but it's been a really frustrating year watching them at West Ham, because I don't personally think they've been bad. I just think that there's not been much progress made, and that's really down to the manager and what we'll talk about today. I think the bottom line is Lucas Paqueta is a player who thrives with the ball at his feet and in central midfield. Gianluca Scamacca is someone who thrives with players around him, playing quite close to goal, not having to be like the linchpin of counter-attacks, but instead being the guy in and around the box. He doesn't even have to be in a 6-yard box. West Ham fans have seen this season that his ball striking is so good. He can rocket them in from 20 yards out with a little backlift. And the tactics of West Ham have deployed this season, contrary to what I thought they would do, has been the antithesis of that. It's been what the Paqueta and Scamacca are just not suited towards. And that's why there's probably a real danger of one of them leaving in the summer, to be honest, if nothing changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is the big reason. When the summer window came around, we made a lot of signings, and this was almost a transition. This was almost a part where we were meant to establish ourselves and start playing a different style that could play to these kind of players like Scamacca, like Paqueta. But it's actually gone the kind of opposite way, actually. It's become very stagnant. It's become very defensive. And like you mentioned, it's not playing to their strengths. Someone like Scamacca, we've seen how good he can be when you have players around him and the ball is at his feet, and he doesn't have to do what a lot of the time Mikel Antonio is asked to do in that formation. So yeah, I think it'll be good to get more insight into that. And yeah, before we get into kind of the different formations and how tactically we could set up going forwards, what have you made of West Ham as a whole this season? What has been kind of your overall consensus about how we're playing and the position we're actually in the league?
I think the best way to sum it up is a step backwards, really. I remember going to a West Ham game earlier this season, actually. It was the last game of the pre-World Cup against Leicester. And the guy I was sitting next to, a friend of mine who had a season ticket, was showing me the stats that you've had since, I think it was November 2021. And West Ham United have fallen off a cliff in that respect. But last season was up for West Ham in terms of possession and keeping the ball and trying to be a little bit more breaking down sides rather than constantly counter-attacking on just like sitting really deep. So my expectation for this season, regardless of the position, I did remember saying, this could be a transitional year, but that's what I expect it to be, a transition to West Ham trying to be a bit more of like a Brighton, or a bit more of a Brighton's the best example off the top of my head. A team looking to control games a little more and take that step forward away from being, fighting relegation to, hang on, we've got good players, let's feed them the ball and see what we can do. But my main thought of West Ham is, it's been a step backwards because there's been no transition. It's been, reverting back to what worked for David Moyes 2 years ago. And sure, they have one of the best defenses in the league, which I should mention. And I think Moyes defenders would like to hear, but the attack has just been woeful. So, yeah, that's the best way to sum it up. Big step backwards and a big disappointment.
Absolutely. I think this season as well, people look at our defensive stats and say we're quite solid. And, we do have one of the better defensive records in the league. But at the same time, I feel like it's much easier to get those statistics higher when your, attacking output is so poor. And the way we set up is like that. A lot of people will always say with West Ham, you will never see us really get smashed in a game. Like it's very rare we lose by more than 2 goals. I don't actually remember the last time that happened. But again, I think that is because of how we set up and how we try and be very resolute and very compact. But going the other way, you look at our attacking output this season, it has been really, really poor. So, I think it kind of works both ways. And we're going to get into that now. So we're going to start with what we think West Ham's ideal setup could be, and the players and the personnel for how to make that work, and how we could then use tactical stuff in game to make that work. And let's get into it. So, Alex, here we have the 4-3-3 in terms of how you'd like to see West Ham set up. And just talk me from, back to front, the personnel and what you see in this that could potentially work for West Ham this season.
Yeah, so I've gone for a bit of a mix here between what I would really like to set up and also what I think, if David Moyes does stay beyond the time this video is released, like what's a little bit realistic. For example, if I really wanted everything my own, I would be putting Areola in goal over Fabianski, because Areola, despite his limited minutes at previous clubs, has consistently been an above average shot stopper. And while Fabianski has been good, I think his age has shown in the last couple of years. But, we'll let Fabianski stay for now because it's hard to argue to really drop him, which is fair. I did think about Kehrer over Soufal. I think Soufal's a good right back still. And what's important for these right backs here is for them to be able to get up and down quite nicely and support the attack rather than just be, staying quite deep with the back four and leaving Ben Rama and Jarrod Bowen isolated. For my back four as well, I'm a little tempted, but I'm going to stick with Zuma and Gerd. But there is an argument to put Kehrer over Zuma because I think Zuma can be a little awkward on the ball. But I think he's been better for West Ham than he was at Chelsea. So again, there's no reason to drop him. Agerd, absolute monster. He stays. And the benefit of Agerd is that when West Ham wants to do a high line, his speed, recovery speed, is so good that when opposition players attack, if I demonstrate very nicely now, player tries to go through, he's very good at making sure if they go this way or that way, he keeps them absolutely covered. So that's why Agerd stays in. Emerson at left back over for Cresswell for me, because Emerson's a bit more mobile. And I think he's been quite decent recently. Midfield, I thought Rice as my holding midfielder. I know a lot of people will argue that he's good in a midfield pivot because he can support the attack, very good in sort of these areas here. But he is also brilliant between the lines, marking players, basically destroying the midfield, getting lost tackles, interceptions, and guarding this West Ham defence here. So that's why I'd have him as a holding midfielder. I'd have Paqueta in at right centre mid. A lot of people think he is an attacking midfielder, partly because of how David Moyes has used him. But at Lyon, he first came through as this right-sided midfielder who'd actually kind of drop into making it a 4-2-3-1. He's a very versatile player. For Brazil, in fact, he's actually played as a defensive midfielder in a 4-2-3-1 alongside Casemiro over Rice. So that's why I have him at right centre mid. So he can get up and down. He can contribute in this half space in the final third. But also he's very valuable at doing the defensive work and slotting in alongside Rice. Fornals is someone we haven't seen enough of. A very good progressive passer and dribbler. good at beating his man here or good at playing the passes in between the men to get it through to someone like Skamaka, who we'll touch on in a second. Ben Rama, I know he's a little divided opinion in the West Ham fan base.
Yeah.
Someone I know, Jack Elderton, very big fan of his work, of their work, and they do say that Ben Rama isn't always very ball secure. He can take his man on a lot and lose it quite often, but you know, I think it's fine. I think he's worth having in there. Bowen writes himself. Skamaka, he's worth having in this sort of system. The system we'll talk through in a second, where he's not worth it. There's reasons why, but here he's good. He's close to goal. If he gets even a little bit of space on his left foot, goes in the top corner. If there's a deep sit in defence, making it hard for him to get the ball around here, he's tall enough and useful enough to get a little bit of space in and around the 6-yard box and score. So yeah, that is quite a lengthy explanation why I think this system works.
Brilliant. Just a few things to touch on from this. So starting, I know you mentioned Rice in midfield there being better as an anchor in terms of what he can do. A lot of people are divided on this in the West Ham fan base. So some people want to see him more as a progressive 8, and some people are really happy with how he performs as a 6. On our channel, we've always said Rice is one of the best 6s. And you know, he is a very good 8 as well. He is very good at, you know, progressing with the ball in more attacking areas. But when you have someone like him who is unbelievable as a 6, it makes sense to keep him there to protect that back four. And if you want to play a higher line, like we're trying, you know, want to do with this system, Rice is exactly the person you'd want in there with a Ged and Zuma behind him. And then that gives you the industrial work of someone like Paqueta and Fornals, who will work very hard, but they also have the technical ability in those pockets to, you know, find those spaces. And then you have Rice just sitting there and being exactly what he is for England. Again, his performances for England go pretty unnoticed just because he's told to sit in that 6 role and he hasn't got much license to roam forwards. But that is what the best 6s in the world do. You know, they will do that. So is that what you feel his best position is for West Ham?
Yeah, I do. And I understand people who might like to see him as an 8, for example, because, you know, he is quite good at, I think he's very good at carrying into open space.
Yeah.
But it's worth saying, listen, if West Ham are playing against, you know, quite a deep defence, let's say West Ham are losing or West Ham playing a weaker team and, you know, they're packed up, right? With Fornals and Paqueta pushing high, there's still room for Rice on the edge of like the final third to play the passes into, you know, a Ben Rama or a Bowen, or to try and carry into open space. So there's still room for him to do what he does very well in the final third. But he just does the defensive work better than anybody else in the West Ham team. And listen, this is the ideal way I think we want to see West Ham play, both of us. But an era of pragmatism is needed. And while we might like Rice's qualities in the final third, the fact he's the best at defending in midfield means by default he kind of has to be in and around here.
Yeah, there's been also some people saying someone like Flynn Downs could play in the 6th role, and that gives Rice the license to maybe move forwards next to Paqueta if Fornals isn't particularly in the team. What do you make of Flynn Downs, and do you think he could, you know, that could be an alternative to that, and it gives Rice a bit more freedom, and it kind of gives some fans what they want to see?
So I think with Flynn Downs, I've seen the bits of him, not as much as Skamaka and Paqueta, but I did look a little bit in the summer, and I've seen a couple of games for West Ham. I think in future he could play that 6th role, but what I think he could work as, say West Ham are trying to, you know, play against a more dominant team, like a top 6 team.
Yeah,
I think Downs can work in midfield instead of Paqueta in a sense, because yes, he provides a lot of defensive work and he could maybe go around the 6, but he also provides a lot of energy and I think a lot more ground covered than Rice. At least I think he's quite a quicker player. So it makes sense to have someone in against, you know, let's say you're playing against a Chelsea, for example, right? Makes sense to have him being able to buzz around midfield and still carry the ball forward. And it just adds a little bit more defensive cover than Paqueta and Fornals. While I say Paqueta is very good at defensive work, this is why I'd like this midfield, because you essentially have the ability to drop into a flat 3, but both Downs and Paqueta are good enough to get forward as well. Obviously, Paqueta's much better in the final third, but it's just a way of making West Ham still play a nice way of football, but also be a little bit more rigid out of possession.
Sure. And so if we put Fornals back in instead of Downs, and we kind of talk about perhaps a game where, like this weekend, Nottingham Forest at home, where West Ham should be and are expected to take the game to a team like that at home and, dominate a bit more in terms of possession and press higher up. Say we did play those kind of games and someone like Skamaka was leading the line. How do you think it is best to get, the best way to get the best out of Skamaka? Because we haven't seen it yet under David Moyes. And we haven't seen it yet in a West Ham shirt, but we know how clinical he can be when he is in and around the box. But again, he's being asked to do a role similar to what Mikel Antonio does, which just isn't in his nature. And you look at Scamacca before when he was playing in Italy, he had people running off of him, people making those runs around him, and interlinking play that way. And we just haven't seen that so far. So how would you get the best out of someone like Scamacca in games where we're expected to be a bit more dominant in possession?
Yeah, just to expand on it, because I can only explain by showing what is happening at the moment. So West Ham are currently operating a back three system, and what we're seeing is Scamacca isolated up front, and what he's very good at, as I said, is being in and around this box and shooting. He's not the quickest player. He's very good in tight spaces. So areas like this, he can escape and play it off to a teammate. However, that teammate needs to be in decent proximity to him. What West Ham are currently doing is operating in like a 5-2-3 or even a 5-3-2, and sometimes dropping into a 5-4-1. And what that leaves is Scamacca up here alone. Now, Antonio, I think, gets miscast as someone like Scamacca and even like Ala, which is essentially what's happened to Scamacca, where Antonio gets miscast as this big target man who's, good at winning the balls and then knocking it down for others so they can run on. But what people forget is Antonio's also very good at spinning his defender and getting into the box as well. He's very quick and he's very powerful. Scamacca and Haller are not that player. They're good in the penalty box, and that's where you want them. So what you want for Scamacca to work is, say West Ham are defending in their, a back four, as we would say, but it can even shift into a back three. Let's say Rice is dropping in, right? What you need is one of Ben Rama or Bowen to be closer to Scamacca out of possession. So when West Ham win the ball and they get it to Scamacca here, he has at least one option rather than none. Even better if you can get Ben Rama a little close to him as well. This lets West Ham build counterattacks. Or if West Ham just, if you really want to try and get the best out of him, you take things slow. You build out from the back and let these three stay high out in possession. You drop Zuma and Agard in to help build out. Then you're bringing Paqueta in and down and stuff. And then the eventual result is, when West Ham are in the final third, Scamacca, when he's receiving the ball, is much closer to goal. And he is a unique player. He's probably better than Haller, I'd argue at least, because Haller, for example, I think he was mainly useful, at least in terms of shooting, around this area. I think 90% of his shots at Ajax came in the penalty box. I think a good percent came in the 6-yard box. Scamacca, as we've mentioned, is brilliant outside of the box. He can score from those areas. So as long as you get him into those roles, into those spaces, then you're going to see much better stuff from him.
Absolutely. And I think one thing with Scamacca is, like you mentioned there, when we're in kind of a more solid back three, back five shape, we are very much a 5-4-1. Bowen will come back to help out Sufal a lot, and it'll play very deep. And then he's then asked to try and get forwards very quickly. Ben Rama is now another one that's similar if he's playing out there, or even if it's Pablo Fornals, who often plays out on the left because of, the work that he puts in defensively. So the thing that we lack, and it's been the big thing, is pace. If we do play this kind of system, we have no pace in and around to counter attack if we're trying to do that when we play this lower block. So it stopped working. We had someone like Jesse Lingard before who was playing in that number 10 role, making those runs off Antonio. Antonio himself was, running the channels. Like you mentioned, he's not a hold-up player, really. He's not someone that's, wanting to interlink that way. He's someone that's really good at spinning in behind and running the channels. So we don't have that with Scamacca. You have to adapt to what you've got, and bringing in someone like Paqueta as well into midfield, it should be pretty self-explanatory to try and play that way and understand that this isn't going to work. The biggest question mark we had was when Moyes was saying, we brought Paqueta in and we're just only discovering now he's more of an 8. Now that should have been clear when you signed the player. You shouldn't be looking at Paqueta and thinking he's a number 10, because he isn't. So yeah, I guess this is a good analysis. Actually, I think it's been really helpful to see how we could kind of set up in a 4-3-3 with the resources that we've got at the moment. So where would you expect if we kind of played this system? Where would you expect this West Ham team, hypothetically, to rank in the Premier League in terms of league position and how effective it could be on the pitch?
Well, it's fair to say there are still flaws. I think Soufal isn't. I think he'd get exposed by having more of the ball because he's not the greatest in the 1v1 situations. So I think he's more likely to be someone who's operating back here, right? So if just like this, I think West Ham could aim for like top 12, top 12, top 10. Top 10's a bit of a stretch. Top 12, top 14 in that areas, which honestly, considering your situation at the moment, is pretty good.
Yeah,
But the benefit of this system is going forward. Once you replace a Soufal with a more competent right back, once even I think Emerson's fine there. Once you're replacing Fabianski with Areola, who's better with the ball at his feet, then you're starting to get into a situation where okay, we've got more secure fullbacks. We've got very good defenders, especially Aged, who's really good at passing out of the back. You've got Declan Rice, who's a good passer and a very good holding midfielder. You've got 2 8s, and as you mentioned, it's atrocious scouting from West Ham to profile Paqueta as a number 10. I mean,
yeah,
they literally could have hired anyone on Twitter and they would have told you otherwise.
yeah.
But anyway, you've got two very good 8s who are not only good at moving the ball into the final third, but also good at being in the final third and linking up with players, right? And then on the wings, you've got two very good players going in the 1v1, especially Ben Rama, who are good at getting into the box. And then you've got Skimaku, who's generally one of the better, most promising upcoming strikers in Europe. He was when he moved to West Ham. It's why I think he ranks as like my number two transfer, in the summer across Europe. I thought it was excellent. So the pieces can very quickly fall into place, but they can only fall into place if West Ham start trying to operate like this instead of playing it safe, going to a 5-2-3 and not getting the best out of their best players.
Absolutely. I think that is the big thing. But one thing we have been trying to play a 4-3-3 in our heads all season. Fans have been pushing for a 4-3-3 and want to see that midfield of Rice, Paqueta, Fornals, but we haven't. So let's just move into kind of the 5-2-3 and what we're actually setting up at the moment. And if we are going to continue to play this back three, how can we get the best out of it? And what kind of personnel you would want to see in terms of how we do get the best out of this? Because there are a few players in here that are kind of questionable as to how to set up, like we mentioned, whether it be an Antonio or Scamacca, or even someone like a Danny Ings now. He's been brought in January to score goals. So how on earth are we going to be able to fit him into something like a 5-2-3 when predominantly his best performances come when he's with a partner striker? So yeah, I guess maybe just go through here what you think would be the best 5-2-3 situation, and then we can discuss it a bit more.
Well, you've given me a headache by bringing up Danny Ings' name. To be honest, I think that was a really big panic buy. I wouldn't be thinking about how to incorporate him. I'd just be thinking of him as a super sub option. I don't think he works. I don't think he's good enough to be in West Ham's best 11. But I digress. To get the best at this 5-2-3, and to be honest, and in fairness to Moyes, the latter January performances I was watching of West Ham, particularly with Paqueta in a midfield duo with Rice, they weren't too bad. I thought they were okay, especially when Emerson and Soufal could get up to support the attack, and it was more of a 3-4-3 rather than a 5-2-3, right? I think Kehrer at right centre back is still an option West Ham should persist with because he's good at covering space wide. He's somewhere in between a right back and a centre back, so that's why he makes a lot of sense for this right centre back role. I think Rice and Paqueta, what Moyes was persisting with before, is the right midfield duo because you have Rice who can still contribute in these areas, but is going to sit and allow Paqueta to go forward, and he can be supported by Emerson and Soufal. These two should just try and invert a little more into midfield rather than staying quite wide and just essentially leaving Rice alone in the middle of the pitch. Maybe if the ball's on the right hand side, Emerson can come in and support Rice a little bit.
Yeah.
And then the front three, I'd like to keep it unchanged, but it all depends on how progressive West Ham are, I think it is a bit difficult to see Scamacca operating here over Antonio, because the way West Ham want to use this 5-2-3 is counter-attacking, and Scamacca isn't as good an option at counter-attacking football as Antonio. Again, it's probably a big miss scouting from West Ham and David Moyes. So you might have to persist with Antonio. But if we try and get Scamacca in, I think what you'd have to do is do what something that Chelsea kind of did, is where they moved their forwards away from the wide areas and made it more of like a proper front three, where they're able to exchange passes a little more, able to link up better, rather than isolating Scamacca in the middle of the pitch. And I think what also needs to happen is, if this is the way, Scamacca needs to drop in to not into midfield necessarily, but be more of a deep line forward. So then he gets away from the defence. He's good enough in this amount of space to receive the ball from a Rice and a Paqueta, and then try and play it into Benrahma or Bone if they come to receive the ball. So there doesn't need to be huge changes within our original lineup, and what Moyes is kind of persisting with is just what it needs to do is do little tweaks like this and avoid players such as a Souček, who I'm keeping him in the black kit, because you take him in over Paqueta, you have someone who's pushing up a lot, you have someone who's not very good at passing, not very good at dribbling. Technically, his abilities on the floor, he's just very good at getting into the box, very good at out-muscling other players, and decent at defending. But if you want to try and keep the ball, he's infinitely a worse option than Lucas Paqueta.
Do you think that's been kind of one of the biggest problems for West Ham this season? I know we've had injuries in and out, but persisting with Souček for this long, when his performances have, severely dipped, and, the way we play doesn't suit him anymore. When he first arrived at West Ham, we were one of the best teams in terms of set pieces. We were much better with crosses. This season, it's been completely different. We've been awful from set pieces, and, just tactically, it's been very different for him. And he hasn't got that license to just roam free anymore, because we've kind of given Rice a bit more freedom to push forward, and Souček has had to maybe sit in a little bit more. So again, what you mentioned there, if we're playing a midfield too, is very difficult to keep Souček in because of his technical ability. And it really does hinder us in our build up, and it prevents us maybe building up in the attacks and in the middle third of the pitch, because you have Kufau and Souček who are next to each other, and trying to build up any momentum down that right-hand side with Bowen, who, again, is another one who's not amazing technically. He's more of a counter-attacking player. So that kind of limits your options down that side. And then you're really depending on someone like Benrahma to unlock a defence.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Souček's been relied on as a bit of a favourite by David Moyes, and that's been a real shame, because, as we said, he's someone who's more loose with the ball than a Lucas Paqueta. Like I said, he's not very good in build-up. He's not someone to drop in. Something that's quite irritating, actually, I see him do is, we'll move him back in as a red for a second. Well, in West Ham colour, I've forgotten the name of it, a claret there.
Yeah.
What he's not very good at is, say he's being marked by the opposition, right? This is a very common thing. If West Ham are trying to build up, let's say have the ball with Zuma, and they want to get it into midfield, what the opposition do, which is very common, is keep the midfielder in their cover shadow. So say the ball goes to Aged, opposition moves here, say it goes to Zuma, moves here, to deny the ball going into midfield, right? Now, what Rice is pretty good at is finding a way around and getting into a bit of space to receive the ball. Souček, a bit like Scott McTominay and Fred at Manchester United, not very good at this. Not very good at. There's a very little intuition to escape the opposition's cover shadow and get the ball. So it effectively means West Ham are more limited in build-up. And that is my biggest complaint with him, and it's why it should be dropped.
Absolutely. Yeah, spot on. I think one thing to just, to finish this off is someone like Fornals. Could he play in this midfield too, do you think, instead of Paqueta? Say if Paqueta was injured, and he has been recently, would you be tempted to put Fornals in there?
I think I would be tempted, yeah. I just haven't seen enough of Fornals recently to be absolutely certain, but from everything I've seen from West Ham fans and from his numbers, where it shows He's very good at progressing the ball forward, and he does carry his weight defensively. I think you could get a similar effect than what you to what you might get from Lucas Paqueta in midfield. Obviously, the worst thing would be to have both Rice, both Paqueta and Fornals the same midfield, because then you have two players who want to be in these areas and no one who
Yeah,
wants to be here. But I think the balance can work as long as Rice is in there. But if we're comparing Fornals to Paqueta, Paqueta is, starting for Brazil for a reason. There's a reason I think he's rated as one of the best players in Europe is because he's technically fantastic. While Fornals is pretty good, I'd still be starting Paqueta over him.
absolutely. And yeah, that was a really good insight into that. So thank you, Alex. I think a lot of people want to see a certain way, but it's hard to visualize sometimes. So having it like that is really helpful. And yeah, I think it's clear to see that, there is potential in this team. I think that is one word we can use with West Ham, potential. And do you think that this is important these next few months? Do you see West Ham going down with the current situation we're in, or how do you see it going for the next few months? Because we still do have Europa Conference League and FA Cup action to go.
Oof, yeah, that's a big problem, isn't it? I my heart really, not heart, my gut says no, you won't get relegated, but I'm not sure if that's just blind faith in West Ham. I look at the table last couple of months, and I just see West Ham right at the bottom, like really in with Everton, who obviously sacked their manager because they didn't think Frank Lampard was good enough. So I think a lot of questions, I think more questions actually from West Ham United's board and hierarchy need to be asked of David Moyes. I think mid-season in the World Cup, it was okay to say, we're going to give him time to turn this around. But now we're coming into March, and West Ham are still, I think, only out of the relegation on goal difference. I think
I
that's
think
the
we're in
point.
it now, actually. I think we're 18th.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. I think this is the point where alarm bells really need to be sounding off. And it can't just be a case of, well, Moyes is the man we'd bring in to turn it around. Clearly, he's not turning it around properly yet.
Exactly. And what you mentioned near the start of the video about kind of West Ham's form since, the back end of 2021, that is really when it started to go downhill. We had the European campaign, we got to the semi-final last season, but from the start of 2022 to now has been atrocious. Our league form has completely dipped off, and that getting to the semi-final of the Europa League kind of papered over the cracks, and there was kind of excuse for the poor league form because we didn't have the squad depth, and the players just looked exhausted. So a lot of fans kind of let us off and let David Moyes off because we still got seventh in the league, which was really good considering we got to the semi-final of the Europa League. But this season was meant to be, you back the manager, spent nearly 180 million pounds. You have to then provide. You have to then adjust your way of playing. And he was saying it in the build-up in pre-season. We're trying to adjust tactically. We're trying to become more of a possession-oriented team. That hasn't been the case. Our possession stats are still pretty poor compared to most in the Premier League. So, yeah, I think one last thing to get from you, from Alex, is do you expect Moyes to stay beyond this summer if he isn't already sacked by the time this video goes out?
Yeah, well, as a look behind the curtain for viewers, I was chatting with Frankie and I said I thought Moyes would stay. I couldn't see West Ham getting rid of him, and you're very certain, and you see a lot of fans are quite certain that if West Ham lose this weekend at the time of recording, then he could be out. And if that is the case, then I think he might be going sooner rather than later. But in an ideal world, I'd quite like to see David Moyes turn things around, get to the summer, and then leave on his own terms, and then West Ham bring in a different manager, someone like a Dominic Tedesco, or if you're being like in your dream reality, by the way, won't happen, but a coach like Mauricio Pochettino, it'd be really good to see West Ham take that natural and more of a quiet step forward rather than trying to tear things up mid-season. And I think the worst thing right now would be if West Ham got a manager who was like David Moyes when he first came in, a firefighter, someone here to save them and play football without the ball. Because do you remember what happened with Sebastian Haller when David Moyes came in? You're going to see that with Skamaka and Paqueta, and you're going to see both of them have much more success than Haller has at Ajax and Dortmund, and West Ham fans were kicking themselves.
Yeah, I think that's the main concern other than relegation is beyond this summer, because Rice looks set to leave, and then it's going to be very difficult to even keep the likes of Agüero at the club with better clubs now looking at his performances and identifying him as one of the better centre backs in Europe. So yeah, Thank you, Alex, for coming on. Really appreciate it. Where can the people find you? I know it's on the screen there, your Twitter, but you're also on TikTok and make kind of content on there as well.
Yes, you can find me on Twitter and TikTok at EuroExpert. You can find me on YouTube at EuroExpert, which I'm trying to restart soon. I'll have a video out by the time this has gone out on RB Salzburg and what's been happening with them. And I'll hopefully have another player profile or a manager profile next week. But I will say, if David Moyes does get sacked in the next few days, you can absolutely guarantee I'll be making at least 2 videos on it, hopefully on the replacement, who's good enough.
Well, there you go. Brilliant. Yeah, make sure to check Alex out. His links will be in the description as well. And yeah, thank you for coming on, Alex. And yeah, until next time, guys, we'll catch you soon.